In just 47 seconds, a single phone call changed everything. Ursula von der Leyen didn't see it coming. She was reviewing budget amendments when her chief of staff burst through the door. The cameras weren't rolling. The European Parliament wasn't watching. But what Donald Trump had just decided would force the most powerful woman in Europe to make an impossible choice. At exactly 2:17 p.m. Eastern Time, Trump signed Executive Order 1.829. The document, stamped with presidential authority, contained just 3 pages. But those 3 pages would shatter the foundation of transatlantic cooperation that had held for decades. Von der Leyen's phone rang 47 seconds later. The voice on the other end wasn't diplomatic. It was final. No one knew that Trump had been planning this move for 6 months. Deep inside Mar-a-Lago, away from the cameras and political theater, he had been studying European energy dependency with surgical precision. His energy advisors had prepared detailed charts showing pipeline capacity, storage facilities, and delivery schedules for every major European economy. They identified the exact moment when European reserves would reach critical levels. They calculated precisely how long it would take alternative suppliers to replace American imports. The analysis was ruthless and comprehensive. The numbers were staggering. Europe imported 83% of its natural gas. Germany alone consumed 54 billion cubic meters annually, with 32% coming directly from American suppliers. The United States controlled the alternative supply chain. Norway could increase production by only 8% within 6 months. Qatar's tankers were already committed to long-term Asian contracts. Russia remained politically impossible after the Ukraine conflict. Trump saw leverage where others saw partnership. The order was devastatingly simple. All American liquefied natural gas exports to European Union member states would be subject to immediate review. New contracts would require presidential approval. Existing agreements would be renegotiated within 90 days. The economic implications hit European markets like a freight train. Natural gas futures spiked 34% in less than an hour. Von der Leyen was in her Brussels office when the news broke. Sources inside the Berlaymont building described the scene as controlled chaos. Her economic advisors were frantically calculating the fiscal impact. Her energy team was working the phones with suppliers in Qatar and Norway. But everyone knew the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. Without American gas, Europe faced an energy crisis that could trigger widespread economic collapse. The timing was surgical. Trump had waited until von der Leyen committed the European Union to a massive climate spending package. The Green Deal required 1.8 trillion euros over the next decade. Now, facing potential energy shortages, European member states would be forced to choose between environmental ideology and basic heating for their citizens. Trump had turned Europe's strength into its weakness. What made the situation even more devastating was the personal element. Von der Leyen had publicly criticized Trump's energy policies during multiple international summits. She had positioned herself as a global climate leader, contrasting European environmental leadership with American fossil fuel dependency. Now, ironically, she needed Trump's fossil fuels to keep European homes warm and factories running. The European Commission's emergency meeting lasted 4 hours. Behind closed doors, the discussion was brutal. German representatives pointed out that their industrial sector depended on cheap American gas. BASF, Europe's largest chemical company, had already warned that production cuts were inevitable if energy costs remained elevated. French officials worried about social unrest if energy prices tripled. They referenced the Yellow Vest protests that had nearly toppled Macron's government over far smaller economic pressures. Italian delegates mentioned that their government could fall if heating costs became unaffordable for average families. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's coalition was already fragile, and energy poverty could trigger mass demonstrations. The room fell silent when the Dutch representative revealed internal calculations from Shell and other energy giants. European industrial competitiveness would disappear overnight if American gas supplies were permanently restricted. Manufacturing jobs would migrate to regions with cheaper energy. The automotive sector, already struggling with electric vehicle transitions, could face complete collapse. Even von der Leyen's Green Deal investments would become worthless if European factories couldn't afford to operate. Von der Leyen found herself trapped between two impossible options. She could maintain her defiant stance against Trump's energy policies and watch European economies suffer through winter shortages. Or she could capitulate to American demands, essentially admitting that European energy independence was an illusion. Either choice would damage her credibility and potentially end her political career. Trump's team had calculated this scenario with mathematical precision. They knew European storage facilities held only enough natural gas for 12 weeks of winter consumption. They knew alternative suppliers couldn't scale up production quickly enough to replace American imports. Most importantly, they knew that European politicians couldn't survive the political fallout from an energy crisis during winter months. The White House statement was released at 4:45 p.m. It contained no diplomatic language or nuanced explanations. Trump had written it personally, and the message was clear. America would prioritize its own energy security and economic interests. European leaders who had spent years criticizing American energy policies could find alternative suppliers. The era of subsidizing allies who undermined American interests was over. European stock markets crashed immediately. Energy-intensive industries saw their share prices plummet. Airlines faced potential route cancellations as fuel costs spiked. Chemical manufacturers like Bayer and Solvay watched their market capitalization evaporate in real time. Steel producers ArcelorMittal and ThyssenKrupp faced potential bankruptcy if energy costs remained elevated. The German DAX index fell 7.2% in the final hour of trading, wiping out 480 billion euros in market value. The euro weakened against the dollar for the first time in 8 months, falling from 1.08 to 1.03 in a matter of hours. Banking executives from Frankfurt to Milan began emergency conference calls. Credit Suisse analysts projected that sustained energy price increases could trigger a recession comparable to the 2008 financial crisis. The European Central Bank faced an impossible choice between raising interest rates to defend the euro or maintaining monetary stimulus to support struggling economies. Every percentage point of energy price increase represented potential insolvency for thousands of small businesses across the continent. Von der Leyen's response was delayed for 6 hours. Her communications team struggled to craft a statement that appeared strong without triggering further American retaliation. When she finally addressed the European Parliament, her voice carried a tension that veteran political observers had never heard before. She spoke about European resilience and energy diversification, but everyone understood the subtext. Europe was vulnerable, and Trump had exposed that vulnerability with ruthless efficiency. The real humiliation came during the emergency NATO meeting. Von der Leyen had to sit in the same room with American officials who held the economic future of Europe in their hands. The discussion about mutual defense cooperation felt hollow when one ally could cripple another's economy with a single administrative decision. The balance of power had shifted permanently. Behind the scenes, European capitals were already reaching out to Washington through back channels. The German Chancellor's office contacted Trump's energy advisors within 48 hours. French President Macron's team explored potential compromises that could restore American gas supplies. Even traditionally neutral countries began reconsidering their criticism of American energy policies. Trump had achieved something that traditional diplomacy couldn't accomplish. He had forced Europe to acknowledge its dependency and reconsider its approach to transatlantic relations. Von der Leyen, who had positioned herself as an equal partner to American leadership, now found herself negotiating from a position of weakness. The global power dynamic had shifted, and everyone in Brussels knew it. The European Union's response revealed the fundamental contradiction in its approach to international relations. European leaders promoted multilateralism and international cooperation while maintaining economic structures that required American support. Trump's decision exposed this contradiction and forced Europeans to confront the reality of their limited options. Von der Leyen's political future now depended on her ability to navigate this crisis without appearing weak or compromised. She had built her reputation on standing up to authoritarian leaders and promoting European sovereignty. But Trump's energy leverage demonstrated that European sovereignty was contingent on American cooperation. The narrative of European strength and independence had collided with the mathematics of energy dependency. The long-term implications extended far beyond energy policy. If Trump could use economic leverage to influence European decision-making on energy, he could potentially do the same with trade, defense spending, or technology regulations. The precedent was established. American presidents could pressure European allies by threatening economic consequences that European countries couldn't afford to ignore. As winter approached, European citizens began experiencing the real-world effects of this geopolitical chess game. Energy bills increased across the continent. Industries that depended on cheap natural gas warned about potential job losses. Political opposition parties in multiple countries used the energy crisis to criticize pro-European policies and advocate for better relations with Washington. Von der Leyen faced a political calculation that would define her legacy. She could continue resisting American pressure and accept responsibility for any economic hardship that followed. Or she could find a face-saving compromise that preserved European dignity while acknowledging American leverage. Either path carried significant political risks and would influence European foreign policy for years to come. The decision that no one saw coming had backed the European Commission president into a corner from which there was no easy escape. Trump had demonstrated that in a world of economic interdependence, the nation that controlled essential resources held ultimate political power. For Ursula von der Leyen and European leaders everywhere, this was a lesson they would never forget.